Hi. Shabbos.
Just wanted to tell you something, that both my daughter and my son-in-law are in love with you. That's number one. Okay, and number two, do you know that Daphna's her grandmother's maiden name was Farkas?
That I did not. She never told me that.
Yes, absolutely. So she's a Farkas too.
Well, I have a bromance with Matt. You know,
okay.
like we're very close. It's very nice. Good morning, everyone. Come on in. Hi, Rochelle. Come on in. You guys ready? Does Eddie usually give announcements first, or?
For a few seconds. Whatever upcoming attractions.
Like Pesach?
Yeah, well, I got news for you. Virginia wins. We have a story of redemption. That, last week he said he thought God had Duke in his bracket because of their unfortunate wins against the others. And I wrote him back. I said, God is a sucker for a redemption story. Virginia wins.
I'm rooting for State. Sorry. My parents went to State, so.
Michigan State?
Yep. We're Spartans.
Whatever. But you have to admit, there's a redemption story element to Virginia win.
Sure. Good. You tell that at your Seder if they win.
Only if they win.
Only if they win.
That's not true. Because so much of sports is what happens when you work together and your teams and connected.
So true.
That if you're only playing for an outcome, you're bound to be disappointed.
Awesome.
And that's not what I always wanted with my girls when they played team sports. I always wanted them to be part of something more than just themselves. So if you want to do something, control the outcome. Swim or run track. You want to be, you want the connection and the bonding. That's the team sports does.
Like the no-look pass is probably the best example of that.
Yeah, of course.
You can't do a no-look pass unless you're in simpatico with your other teammates.
By the way, the guy who made that play, I'm sure you saw that
Yeah.
play. Taft High School.
Really?
Yeah, 5'9", Taft High School. Keegan Clark.
Good shot.
Named for the town in Maui.
Well, good morning, everyone. Shabbat Shalom. Nice to have everyone here. Nice to have everyone here. I know I might have a beard, but I'm not Rabbi Feinstein. I'm not wearing a sweater vest, and he's celebrating a family simcha this weekend, so we want to give him a mazal tov. And we want to say hi to everybody on the internet, so everyone say hello. Nice to see everyone. And we want to welcome Dr. Lever back to our learning group again after his week of Shiva. So it's so nice to have you here. Yeah. From what I understand, we've been working through the Siddur and talking about prayer, right? And prayer, Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel says, is that prayer is both the least human and most human thing you can do. Least human because it's a very strange thing. There's part of us that's just this creatureliness, right? And we're just trying to get through the world. We have society. We're just trying to make a living, right? But also the most human thing that we can do, because I don't think, at least I don't know, but I don't think there's any other creature in the given world that actually prays, right? I mean, think about it for a minute, right? A praying mantis, right? Now, I will tell you, as a man, the last thing I want is for my wife to be a praying mantis, because, right? But I don't think, what makes us human in so many ways, right, is that we have an imagination, right? We imagine the world that's in front of us and maybe a world that doesn't even exist yet, right? And imagination can be a curse, or it can be a blessing, right? Imagination can be a curse because all you can think of are all the things that you're missing out on, right? The young people call that FOMO, which is fear of missing out, right? That all you can think of are the things that you're not doing. I meet with a lot of young people, and they're like in their early to mid-20s, and they're in this place where they finished their schooling, or maybe they finished their BA, and now they're like doing some work in between that and maybe going to graduate school. They're dating someone. They're going to yoga every day. They're like eating their like kale salad and cucumber, juice, something. And they're kind of miserable. And all I can think of is like, you get to go to yoga every day. And you get to eat interesting foods and hang out with your friends. You don't have to change diapers or drive a minivan, So why is that? And it's because they're plagued by their imagination for the life that they feel like they are just beginning. And they feel cursed by that. Because they can imagine themselves doing this thing. Or they can imagine themselves doing that thing. They can imagine themselves being in Hollywood and being an actor or a producer or something. And they can also imagine themselves, maybe they majored in biology and wanting to go in the field of biology. And they just don't know which path to choose. And their imagination is a burden. It's like a yoke. And it just pulls them down. And they don't know which door to walk through, and they're afraid because if they choose one door, they're necessarily not choosing other doors, right? And all the more so if they're dating someone. The number one question I get from young people who are dating people seriously is like, how do I know this is the right person for me? How do I know? I'm like, I've been married 15 years. I know not as long as other people, right? I'm like, I still don't know. Right? So imagination can be this curse, but it can also be a blessing, right? Imagine, one of the greatest blessings is if you're going to have a child, and you imagine your life with them as you're progressing towards birth. You imagine playing with them, growing up with them, watching them go to prom, dancing with them at their own wedding, right? What a blessing, right? Or you imagine a world redeemed, a world that's better than our world, right? That's what makes us human, is our ability to imagine, not just to think. It's not like a Descartes duality where it's like, I think, therefore I am. It's like, I imagine, therefore I'm human, right? There's no other creature in the world that has that kind of imagination. Can you imagine, using your imagination, can you imagine a zebra on the savannah walking down the existential question, am I black horse with white stripes or a white horse with black stripes? What kind of, or a giraffe that's like, I have this really long neck and brown spread, what am I, like, am I a llama? Am I a camel? What am I? Like, I don't think giraffes worry about that. But we do. We do. We as human beings worry about that all the time. That's like who we are, right? We contemplate life, right? How iconic is the soliloquy in Hamlet where he picks up the skull of his former caretaker, right? And he contemplates life and death while looking at poor Yorick. There's no other creature in the world that does that. So prayer, as my teacher, Rabbi Neil Gilman, would say, is the experience of imagination. And you've been going through this whole cycle of the Siddur of imagining you're on this pilgrimage and you're getting closer and closer and closer to Jerusalem. And you're about to enter the gates of the temple, which is where we're going to talk about today, right? That's an imaginative experience. Professor Gilman, Rabbi Gilman once said, right, it's not a matter of mythological, or no myth. We spent much of the 20th century trying to demythologize the world. I mean, medicine, for example, is probably the best example, right? Does anybody know what disease dropsy is? You're a doctor. Does anyone know what dropsy is? It's an ambiguous term for something that someone was sick, and then they would, what's the cure for dropsy? No, it was to actually do bloodletting, as if that was the cure, right? It wasn't until they went from that to the idea of science. And science, the goal of science was to demythologize medicine, which it has, right? Unless you're a psychiatrist, and we still haven't done that yet, right? So Gilman would say, though, you're not moving from myth to no myth. You're moving from one myth to another, because we live by myth. We live by creating a narrative and pictures of the world that schematize or create patterns of existence that we can then make intelligible to us and then experience in the world. So the matter is not myth or no myth, but which myth will you live by? I'll give you one really important myth, okay? You ever heard the word love conquers all? What does that mean? Yeah, well, maybe it doesn't. I don't know. That's a myth, right? Or, liberty and justice for all, right? Well, the question is, so here's the question, right? For liberty and justice for all, if you use your imagination, you can imagine a world in which there is liberty and justice for all, even though the words liberty and justice are actually antonyms in certain ways. Because if you're totally free and I'm totally free, does that mean I'm free to steal your stuff and you're free to steal my stuff, right? Justice is a qualifier on the word freedom, right? So, but if you just imagine a perfect world, then, well, if you just imagine it, right? Imagine it for just a minute, right? If you use your imagination, then when you're saying the pledge and you're thinking about it, then when the pledge is over, you might actually go out and try to pursue that thing, right? It's used as an axiom, as a starting point from which the world then can be built. It's not a real world. It's an imaginary world, right? To me, that's exactly what prayer is we're building an imaginary world. Using our idiom, our experiences, our life, and bringing those experiences into the world as we know it, and trying to bridge the gap between our imagination and our perceived reality. Okay. Now, that might all be very philosophical, but I think it's a great way of getting into this conversation of the Amida. So, any questions about that before we start going into our deep dive? Okay. So the Amida, you'll need two things today. You're going to need this little worksheet here, and then you're going to need your Siddur. The red ones are fine if the red ones are the ones that are out there, which just have the words of the Amida. I didn't really include them in this, so if you got it, it's great. Hey, come on in. The Amida in the one we'll just be working from is page 142. Just go to that one, it's fine. It says the evening prayer, but the words are basically the same, so you got that. Okay? Oh, and by the way, just as we're opening it up, right? A couple of really interesting, timely touch points, right? So Passover's coming. It's 2 weeks from last night, right? So we have in this coming week, Pesach is coming. We have a lot of different seders happening. There's probably 12 of them happening in the coming week for our kids. And then there's a women's seder. There's a teen who are having a chocolate seder, all coming up. The Siyum in the morning of Friday morning, which is the Erev Passover, Erev Pesach. The Siyum Bechorot is is a week from this coming Friday morning. Rabbi Feinstein will be teaching. He'll be offering breakfast. So I just want to make sure you know about that. And then we have the wonderful holiday of Passover, and we're already getting to the end of the academic year, and VBS becomes a runaway freight train for the next 3 weeks as we're going through end of the year stuff and graduations and Shavuot is coming. It's all happening. Yeah, Vic.
When's the rabbi doing the Friday morning?
That is 2 weeks from yesterday morning.
The 19th.
Thank you, the 19th. Right, the 19th.
So that's not going to be.
There's one on Thursday.
Yeah, there's a Passover prep happening. I think it's that Thursday night.
Like 2 days before.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so again, though, Passover is an active part of our imagination. What's the most imaginative part of Passover? Finding the afikomen, right. But it's also, right, but, I mean, there's a lot of different ones, but I would say the core of it is, right, B'chol dor vador, Adam ro'eh etzmo, ki'ilu hu yatsa miMitzrayim, that each and every generation, each of us should ro'eh et atzmo. We should see ourselves, see themselves, right? That's the active imagination, as if we went out from Egypt, right? And the reason for that is because we're trying to use our active imaginative memory to collapse time like an accordion and put us right there on the night of redemption and on the travel to the sea and on the other side of the sea and to see Sinai on the horizon, right? In every generation. That's an active imagination. The Haggadah is as much a text that should be studied as it is that it should be prayed. It's part of prayer. That's why we believe in Jewish life study is akin to prayer. Okay? All right, so I want to look at this Mishnah. This Mishnah is about 3 men, all of whom come from different experiences and how they approach the Amidah. Okay? So take a look with me. Okay? It's actually 4 men. Okay? This is now from Mishnah of Brachot, the Talmud tractate that's about prayer. And if you're in my Talmud class, we just look in the middle of going through the Talmud on this Mishnah. So I see Jerry is here. We want to wish him a happy birthday and happy birthday this week. So let's look at this Mishnah together, okay? Rabban Gamliel says every day a person must pray the 18 blessings, Shmona Esrei, right? All right, well, I'll get to that. Rabbi Yehoshua says one may say just an abridged version of the 18 blessings. Rabbi Akiva says if his prayer is fluent in his mouth, he should pray the 18, and if not, then the abbreviated set. You can do it, right? Okay? Rabbi Eliezer says one who makes his prayer set as though it's burdensome to him, his prayer does not constitute supplication. Meaning, so I'm going to just go through each one. Rabban Gamliel says you have to pray how many blessings every day? Except that if you know Judaism, you know how many blessings are in the everyday Amidah? Anyone? 19. Right. Well, scratch your head. How does 19 become 18? That's Jewish math. Okay, that's just how it works. There's a whole section of Talmud about that. That's not the subject of today's conversation, but you should know that 19 is 18, and 8 is actually 7, and 7 really isn't 7. It's 7 plus 1 extra hour, because that Shabbat is 25 hours, not 24 hours, even though we call it a day. This is how it goes, okay? We're a little fuzzy on all of that, right? In fact, if you go into the Haggadah itself, how many plagues are in the Haggadah? 10, unless you believe Rabbi Akiva, who says there's like 1,000, right? Like, and then they just go through, and like, there's all of a sudden it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. It's like they're fuzzy math. That's exactly right. Okay, so Rabban Gamliel says, how many blessings can you pray in 18 full blessings? Now, we're not going to go through all 18 of those blessings. Again, that's for another class. But several pages of texts, right? Each paragraph is a paragraph that focuses on one idea or event or intention and then ends with the blessing, Baruch Atah Adonai, whatever that thing is, right? So if you want to pray for God to return to Zion, the Zionist prayer, right? You say, Baruch Atah Adonai, right? Chozer Shchinato L'Tzion, right? May your God's presence return to Zion, right? So there's a whole little paragraph before that, right? Or if you want to pray for God just to hear your prayer, you say, blah, blah, da, 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 God hear our prayer, open our eyes, right, Baruch Atah Adonai, Shomea Tfilah. Now, it's really interesting. I got to mention this before we get any deeper. The word Shomea is in present tense. All the words of the prayers are in present tense. But what we're actually praying for is future tense. So how do you, again, what is the link between present tense and future tense? In the mode of prayer, it is our imagination. We are imagining as if it is already happening, because that is how we link the world of our imagination to the world of our lived experience. Okay? Rabban Gamliel says you have to pray all 18 prayers. Rabbi Yehoshua, who's like his number one sparring partner, says, no, you don't. You only have to pray some abridged form, and maybe just those lines, Baruch Atah Adonai, etc. Right? Rabbi Akiva, who is like their student, he's trying to like make mom and dad get along. He's the peacemaker. What does he say? If you know all 18 blessings, then you should follow 18 blessings. But if you don't know them, then just do what you can. Okay, so we have 3 opinions so far. And then we have Rabbi Eliezer. What does Rabbi Eliezer say? Right. So it's like if you don't mean it, and it doesn't touch the life situation in which you live, forget about it. Now we have 3 opinions. Rabban Gamliel says, high, classic, do everything, right? Rabbi Yehoshua says, yeah, okay. Skip Rabbi Akiva for a minute. And Rabbi Eliezer, who's the same generation as the other 2, says nothing at all. Okay. Now you got to know something about who these men were. Rabban Gamliel is the head of the Sanhedrin after the fall of the Second Temple in Yavna. Okay? His father, Rabbi Shimon, was the head of the Sanhedrin at the time of the fall of the Second Temple. And Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, so Rabbi Gamliel's grandfather, whose name was also Gamliel, was the head of the Sanhedrin at right after the time of Jesus. Okay, so who is his family? Jewish aristocracy, right? They're the Jewish aristocrats. You should know that Rabban Gamliel's father, right, was captured and assassinated and tortured by the Romans. Okay? And when Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai negotiated with Vespasian to save a part of the Jewish people, the scholarly class, he negotiated for 3 things. He negotiated to safe passage to a town called Yavna, right? He negotiated for recovering some of the Jewish literature and the sages that proffer that literature, and specifically not to murder or assassinate Rabban Gamliel's family because they have been the head. The Romans would want to cut the head off, so to speak. And Rabban Gamliel, who was a young man at the time, was slated to become the next head of the Sanhedrin. And Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai begged Vespasian not to kill his family. Successfully negotiated for all those 3 things. The temple fell. The Sanhedrin reconstituted itself in Yavna. Okay? Yeah, well, Rabban Gamliel, yes. None of us would be studying these texts if Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai hadn't successfully negotiated with the Romans. Okay? That's another conversation about the loss of power, the return to power. We can have to talk about Zionism another time. But so that's what happened. Rabbi Yehoshua, is very interesting. His name is Rabbi Yehoshua bar Levi. He comes from the Levite class. Okay, he's a Levite. So what was the role of the Levites in the temple? What do? They were the singers, they were the cleaners, they were the schleppers, right? They were the helpers in the temple, right? Rabbi Yeshua's grandfather was an actual Levite in the temple. Rabbi Yeshua's father was of the last generation of Levites, and Rabbi Yeshua himself is of the first generation. He was a young child, when he saw the temple fall. But he has stories from his pappy and grandpappy about what it was like in the temple. Okay? And then we have Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer is Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkanus. His father's name is Horkanus, which should tell you a little bit about who his father was. If your dad's name is Horkanus, do you think that they're a really scholarly family? No. They are an assimilated Jewish family. He has a Roman or Greek name. They were very big in trade and business. They lived in a town called Caesarea. That should give you another example of where they chose to live, is a place named after Caesar, which was the great Roman port. During that time, they were traders, right? And Rabbi Eliezer, when he was a young man, decided to throw all of that away to go learn with Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai in Jerusalem. And Horkanus basically disowned him because of it. He was the businessman who disowned the son, who decided not to go into the family business, until towards the end of his life, he saw his son lecturing in the lecture hall, and he saw what a scholar his son actually became, and decided to sort of reinstitute his inheritance. Now, why do these stories matter, and what does it have to do with prayer? Rabbi Gamliel comes from Jewish internal aristocracy. Rabbi Yeshua comes from the Levite class who is not necessarily rabbinic. It comes from pre-rabbinic times. And Eliezer ben Horkanus is an assimilated Jew who only in his sort of coming up in his young adulthood came to Judaism. So he didn't grow up making Shabbos. He grew up making business. And only did he come to it as a young man. Now the three of them are sitting together and they're discussing prayer. So Rabbi Gamliel says, you have to pray all 18 blessings. Why would he say that? Yeah, go ahead.
He is an aristocrat. He has the time to study and learn, so that he doesn't have to go out and schlep during the course of his day. So that what else would you do if you had that time?
That's exactly right. Right. He grew up in the world of the academy, and in the world of the academy, you make time for Shacharit, for Mincha, and for Mariv. So of course you're going to do all 18 blessings because, have you ever talked to grad students? You ever talk to someone who's writing their dissertation? Doesn't matter what their dissertation's on, right? You ever talk to a PhD student who's writing their dissertation? Well, you could be at McDonald's and ordering a hamburger, and their entire world about that experience is going to be filtered through their work of their dissertation, right? I was talking to someone who was getting a PhD in natural law, and we were getting a cup of coffee, and he just kept going on about the menu and this and then da-da-da-da-da, and filtered it through this whole thing about natural law. Dude, I just want a latte. That's the world of the academy, right? I don't want to make fun of it, but when you're in that world, that's the world you're in. How about Rabbi Yeshua? He was a Levite. I got news for you. Did the Levites have a job after the temple fell? No. What else do we know about the Levites? Did they have any land? No. They had little pockets of land that were gifted to them to help maintain. Right, so they lived off the largesse of the Jewish community, right? Right? So what happens after the fall of the temple? You go from being Jewish elite to being nothing. In fact, those of you who have studied the story of Rabbi Yeshua with me know that he had to go back to work. And what did he do? Does anyone remember what he did for a living? He made nails for a living. Dirty, hard work. His house was covered in soot from the kiln and from the right? So here he is. He's coming from a place of sort of fallen grace, right? And he's saying, you don't have to pray the whole thing. Number one, because we never did that actually in the temple, which is a very strong argument, right? Do you think that they got up there and said the Shemona Esrei in the temple? Sorry for my Chabad friends and for my very frum friends, right? They didn't do that. They had sacrifice. It was a different mode, right? So Rabbi Yeshua was saying, you didn't just say the 18 sentences. You don't have to do anything more than that. And secondly, he worked for a living, right? He had to build stuff for a living. And being a rabbi was the thing he loved doing, but he had to earn a living. He didn't come from aristocracy. He didn't have generations of wealth. He wasn't a trust fund kid, right? So he's saying, pray shorter. Or what about Rabbi Eliezer? So Rabbi Eliezer comes from a lot of wealth, but no Jewish background. So what's on his mind when he falls from grace and ends up having this conversation after learning a lot of Torah? Who is he thinking about? Who's he thinking about? Yeah, well, I don't think he's necessarily thinking about gaining his own power. He's probably thinking about all the Jews out there that are unaffiliated. All the Jews out there that aren't connected. All the Jews out there that don't have a story to tell about their own Jewish life. And he thinks that the aristocracy and even the vestigial priesthood, that's all fine and good, but at the same time, if you're not touching the hearts of actual human beings, that prayer isn't prayer. That's not real prayer. You're just reciting, you're doing a pageant, right? Therein, of course, lies the entire tension about prayer itself, right? Do you need centralized prayer and a centralized organizing structure? Rabbi Gamliel would say, Absolutely, yes. And by the way, who's in charge of that central organizing structure? Rabbi and Gamliel. So, like, yeah, of course we need it because, I'm in charge, right? Rabbi Yeshua is somewhere in the middle, and Rabbi Eliezer says, no, everyone should be able to make their prayers the way they want to make their prayers. What's most important is their connection to God. Okay. So all of that is an introduction to the Amidah. The Amidah is the most complicated prayer that we have. You pray it 3 times a day. There's really 19 prayers, even though we call it 18 prayers. And on fast days, there's 24 prayers. And forget about Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur or even Musaf, right? I mean, it's a very complicated prayer. What does Rabbi Eliezer say about these prayers, you think? Forget it, right? If it doesn't touch your heart, then what's the point? So in response to that, he had to write a book. And he wrote a book called Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, where he tries to tell the story of the Amidah, because he wants it to touch the heart. Okay? And to do that, we have to know what the first 3 prayers of the Amidah are. So before we get into the story, let's just look now at page 142. Okay? Page 142. Okay, this is the beginning of the Amidah. You probably heard this 100 times or thousands of times in your life, right? You all know it, right? Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei Avoteinu Elohei Avraham Elohei Yitzchak Elohei Yaakov Elohei Sarah Elohei Rivka Hey Rachel v'Elohei Leah Ha'el Hagadol Hagibor v'Hanara El Elyon Gomel Chasadim Tovim v'Konei Yaakov v'Zocher Chastei Avot Umevi Goel Livnei V'neihem Laman Shemo B'Ahava Melech Ozer Foked Moshiach Magen Baruch Atah Adonai Magen Avraham Ufoked Sarah. That's the first prayer. Okay? So what are the words, if you ever had a Hebrew school education, what are some of the words that stick out to you? What are some of the words that are important about this prayer? Okay, you got Avraham, you got Yitzchak, Yaakov, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah. Okay, other words? Just Gomel. What's Gomel Chasadim Tovim mean? What does that mean? Gomel is like to sort of cause to make happen, right? So like you make good, loving things happen. What's the last word in the first paragraph? The word is ahava. There's a word about love, right? Right? How about that last sentence? Baruch atah Adonai Magen Avraham Ufoked Sarah. Blessed are you, God, who is the shield of Abraham and is the one who remembers or takes note of Sarah. Okay. So what's this prayer really about? What's it about? Is it about your interest, your personal interest? And is this Eliezer's like, oh, it's meaningful to me?
Like introduction as to who is God, what we are praying.
But I've been praying for an hour already. Why do I need to reintroduce who God is? Like,
Now, maybe you're first of all, you're not sitting, you are standing.
Right, it's called the Amidah, which means the standing prayer, right? Right. Oh, yeah, thanks, Doug.
Kavod, showing kavod.
Okay, so showing honor, right? Using Rabbi Feinstein's metaphor of being at the altar, you're now at the altar, you're now in the court of God, you are addressing God at the altar. What's the first thing we're going to tell God or ask of God or say of God? God, you are the God of history, of our ancestors, my family, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah. You are their God, and therefore the implication is you are my God. Same God, right? That's that accordion of history. I'm taking myself back in time to the moment. Yeah, Doug.
I always thought when it said Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, the God of each of them, that they each had to come to God individually, which was why you were reciting every one of the names.
That's a nice midrash. So what Doug is saying is not entirely untrue, and definitely in midrashic literature there is that move. But at the same time, the word Elohei Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov is also quoted in the Torah, so it's kind of a quote from there. And I love, that's a great midrash. So then the implication would be is how do each of us come to God, right? All right, what about the idea of being the shield? Like what, or the rememberer? Right, but why is that the version as opposed to God, you are the Bocher Avraham. You're the one who chose Abraham because Abraham was chosen in Lech Lecha, right? Lech Lecha ma'artzecha right? Why are we using that language, right?
When was the prayer then?
So this prayer was formed in the 1st to 2nd century by sort of arranged by a man named Shmuel HaKatan, the younger Shmuel, and he's the one who put these formal prayers together under the sort of tutelage of Rabban Gamliel. Okay, now the word Magen Avraham, like what story does that tell? We know what value that has for us, but what story does that tell for each and every one? What's the imagination, right? What's the imagination? Yeah.
This is after the temple was destroyed, so they felt very vulnerable, and
Okay.
they have to remind themselves that God is still protecting them.
Okay, good. So one version of this might be that Magen Avraham is implying after the destruction of the temple that God is still our protector, right? That is definitely the implication. It's not the source, but it is the implication of that text. We have this wonderful part in Genesis. Right, think about Abraham's life. Was it easy? I mean, think about this, right? He was 70-something years old before God ever said hello to him. Okay? He then, on his way to Haran, he found God, or God found him. And only then, at 70, did he decide to go on life's most immaculate journey and completely throw everything away and start over again. But what happened? What was his life? Was his life perfect? Like, was it like, oh, and now you're going to be a blessing and you're going to walk into Disneyland and eat popcorn and cotton candy and go on all the rides, right? No, that's not. Right? In fact, the rabbis say there were 10 trials, very difficult things that happened to him. Let's see if we can name a couple. Okay, so the Akedah is the last one. I'll get into that in a minute, right? But, like, think about it. He goes into the land. He's promised all this stuff. He gets none of it. He has to work for it. So, number one, he gets into a fight with his nephew, right? And his nephew goes down to Sodom, right? Number two, there's a civil war happening in that land, and he has to create allies. And by the way, they kidnap Lot through this process, and he has to go rescue him, right? He has to deal with famine, and he has to end up in Egypt. Remember that? And he has to actually tell the Pharaoh that his wife is not his wife, it's his sister, because if he tells him it's his wife, these might kill him and then take Sarah, but he ends up taking Sarah anyway, and then he has to go redeem Sarah and get back to go all the way back, right? That's a long story, right? Right? And then the 10th trial, oh my gosh, the 10th trial is one where God asks him the impossible thing, to bring his son, the one he's been waiting for his entire life, right? Go on a 3-day journey up to Mount Moriah, and to offer him as a burnt offering on an altar to God. And only at the very last moment, you can see it up there in the tapestry, only the angel comes out and holds his hand back, right? Now, according to Midrash, Sarah dies because of that. Right? Her heart's totally broken. She dies. So, Abraham's life was not easy. It was very hard. But he survived and made through all of it. Being a blessing isn't easy. It's not meant to be easy. You're not supposed to live on easy street. Being a blessing is finding moments of grace in the few years that we have on this earth, right? And so, but through it all, Abraham, as much danger as he was, felt that he had someone who had his back. And the word in the Bible for that is the word magen, which means to have a shield. If you look at what Rabbi Eliezer says, look in this text here, this first one, okay? This is at the end of his life, okay? This is, this is Rabbi Eliezer's imagination to making the Amidah sound like something that feels intelligible to a Jew who isn't in the aristocracy and didn't grow up having to recite all 18 blessings. Remember where he is, right? So he's coming from, right? So this is what he says. He says, Abraham arose and praised before the holy, blessed be he, saying, Sovereign of all worlds, not by the power of my hand, nor by the power of my right hand have I done all these things, by the power of thy right hand, which thou dost shield me in the world and in the world to come. As it says, now he's of course quoting Psalms, but thou, O Lord, art a shield to me in this world, my glory and the lifter up of mine head in the world to come. Then the angels answered his prayer and said, Baruch atah Adonai Magen Avraham. Abraham does not say anything about the Amidah, according to Rabbi Eliezer. Abraham just speaks from his heart and thanks God for a long and fruitful and not undifficult life, difficult life. And then, according to Rabbi Eliezer, after Abraham prayed, it's the angels who wrote the words of the Amidah. That the word Baruch atah Adonai Magen Avraham is not written by Abraham, but by the angels. How does that sit with you? I know we're not in the world of analytics here. We're in the world of imaginations. So poetic imagine. How does that sit with you? Yeah, please.
It's confusing because the Amidah came way, way, way after Abraham, unless you believe that everything was written
Great.
At the very beginning, and that's how it is.
Good. So what you're asking, does everyone understand the question or the challenge? The challenge is that this stuff was written way after. Abraham didn't write the Amidah. Abraham didn't write any of this stuff, right? Okay, you're right. You're 100% right. I got news for you. God didn't write all the words of the Torah either. Okay?
Well, that's your belief.
That's my belief. That is my belief. Okay, but here's what I'm trying to say. If we're operating in the world of imagination, and we're operating in the world of poetry, we're operating in the world of art, and not in the world necessarily of science and of logic, then does it really matter who wrote what? What matters is, does it speak to the human experience? Right? And Rabbi Eliezer cares about that. And so he says, if your prayer is set prayer and it is only rote, then it doesn't really count as prayer. So what did Abraham say? He said, according to Rabbi Eliezer's imagination, he said, I lived a long life, a difficult life, but thank you, God, for protecting me. And the angels are the ones who responded, Magen Avraham, as a way of saying an affirmation to Abraham's prayer. Okay? Okay, you keep coming at me. I can do this all day.
Doesn't it make you selfish? You're just thinking about yourself when you pray, when you do the Amidah?
Great question. The question is, isn't it just really selfish to pray the Amidah in this way, right? I would answer two ways. Number one, yes, unless, when else in my life am I going to address my personal pain, my personal joy, my life story, the things that have dinged me along the way, and my relationship with the universe? To me, it might seem selfish, or it might just seem personal. Imagine you're in a negotiation and someone says, you're a good person. Why are you fighting for yourself so hard? And you're like, well, when else in my life, except in this negotiation, am I going to fight for my interest, myself? So that's different than the communal prayer. I'm talking about personal supplication. Communal prayer, when we're all together, we bring a different story into that, especially because we're talking about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and connecting all of us to our ancestors. Right now, so imagine if you, for just a minute, in this first prayer of the Amidah, took Eliezer's advice, right? And you took the words out. And you just took this first section in your private prayer, and you say, thank you, God, for giving me life, giving me a family, getting me through cancer, through my kid's divorce, right? Imagine if that was like, speak to the heart, right? And then you heard the angels say, Baruch atah Adonai Magain, in your name, right? Magain Jerry, Magain Doug, Magain Norm, whoever, right? Oslo, right? I don't know. I think that's what Eliezer's trying to get at, okay? Now, according to Rabbi Eliezer, Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer, who is it that created this first blessing, this feeling for this first blessing? The angels in response to Abraham. Okay. Yes. You have a question?
No, I have a comment.
Please.
I don't see this as a selfish prayer, because Abraham is not saying, God, I want you to protect me. It's more of a gratitude. Thank you, God, for protecting me. So that's a big difference.
Yeah. I also want to be clear that, like, in this prayer, it's not like Abraham saying, thank you for protecting me from negativity. Thank you for protecting me from never suffering. Thank you for protecting me from ever losing money or losing hope. Right? That's not what we mean by protection. We have imagined a perfect life where there's just everything's on easy street. We wake up in the morning, we feel great, nothing hurts. We go to work at like 10:30 a.m. because nobody expects us to be there any earlier. After we go to the gym, we have a beautiful day. We go for a walk in the middle of the day. You finish your job, you seal a deal, you make millions of dollars, you come home, you have sex with your spouse, you go out for dinner, you have sex again with your spouse, and you go to sleep and you start over again. Like, that's not the world we live in, okay? Like,
Sure wanted to.
right. Oh, sure, of course, like that, that would be amazing, but that's not the world we live in, right? Not even vacations. You ever go on vacation, you expect it to be absolutely perfect, and the dinner reservation falls through, or the flight gets delayed, right? I mean, this is, right? There's always something, right? There's always something, right? So God's not trying to protect us from not suffering. In fact, suffering itself means that you're feeling a gap between the way you expect the world or want the world to be and the way you're actually experiencing it. But knowing that you can get through it somehow, either with friends or family, telling stories, or maybe despite friends or family, depending on your friends or family, right? It means that you know that there's someone out there that loves you. And maybe that's worth praying about. I see. Yes, go ahead, and then I want to move to the next one.
So, the prayer is like a love letter to God, is how I see it, where the person praying is expressing, first of all, how amazing God is, and then all the thankfulness that God is in my life. So that's kind of the way I conceptualize it.
That's great. Right. So there have been plenty of people who've conceptualized all of prayer as two love letters. We write a love letter to God. Well, first of all, God writes a love letter to us. That's where it begins. God's love letter begins to the world. God's love letter begins, Breshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz va'eta tohu v'vohu v'ruach Elohim rachefet al hatahom. The God's first love letter to the world begins with, in the beginning, the world was crazy and full of chaos, but the Spirit of God flooded over everything. Right? And God's love letter to us is through giving us Torah. And our love letter back to God is V'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha b'chol levacha b'chol nafshecha b'chol madecha. We love God with all of our heart, all of our soul, and all of our might by learning and teaching that Torah to ourselves and to our children. Right? And that we return God's love by embodying God's love. Right? I want to go to the third prayer, okay? So if you go down to the bottom of page 142, okay, now during the daytime prayer, we have this long prayer called the Kedusha. That's where everyone stands up and they're kind of bouncing a little bit, or they're going like this, right? And it's like where the Chazan really like tries to take off and like do his Chazanis, right? The Kedusha is, in the mind of the prayer book, it is a trip to heaven. You're no longer just at the altar. You're actually going all the way up to heaven. It's based on the 6th chapter of Isaiah, and Isaiah's commissioning story when he becomes the prophet. God swoops him up, brings him up to heaven, and there Isaiah sees the heavenly court with swarms and swarms of these angels swarming around the Godhead. And there he says to God, Kadosh, 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 Adonai Tzvaot Maloch La'aretz Kevodo. Right? That's where it comes from. The prayer here just at the bottom of 142 is the very, very short version that we only say at night, okay? Because we don't do a whole long Kedusha ceremony. It says, Ta Kadosh V'Shimcha Kadosh U'Kadoshim B'chol Yom Yohalu Chasela Baruch Ata Adonai Ha'el HaKadosh, right? You are holy, and your name is holy, and holiness every day. May you be praised. Praised are you, Baruch Ata Adonai, the God of holiness, okay? So here in the Amidah, we began with this story of Abraham and connecting us to history. We'll get to the second paragraph in just a minute. Skip that for a second. We've done all of that, and now the very important thing is we go and we actually meet God in heaven. Take a little trip to heaven, just for a minute, and we say hello to God. And what is the thing that we remark about God's number one attribute is God's holiness. Okay. So if you're Rabbi Gamliel, there's long paragraphs of things you have to say. In fact, the Kedusha in the morning, right? That's like, or even the Musaf Kedusha, are all things that have to do with God's holiness. If you're Rabbi Yeshua, right? He says this just short line counts. What if you're Rabbi Eliezer? Like, how do you take a trip to heaven if you can't get out of your own head? Right? This is the most pageant-oriented part of the entire Amidah. Right? This is where Rabban Gamliel really wins out over the rest, right? Because this is in the community. You can only do the Kedusha if you have a minyan, which means you need 10 people, right? And you're supposed to bow at certain times, and you bounce on your feet like you're pretending you're flying like an angel. That's what this is supposed to represent. And so you're doing that, right? You're actually seeing God in front of you, and you exclaim God's holiness, right? So what's the story? What's a story that's more tangible than that? It's too out there. That's too far. That's too crazy. What's the story that feels more tangible to you where you say, that experience, that's God? Think about that. Where in your life, if ever, have you had this experience where the world you imagine, the power of the universe that you have come to know, you feel that it is corresponding to your actual reality? Imagination is the bridge between your perceived real experience and the one that is in your mind that you are dreaming of, right? When do you feel that? Marriage? Sergio, marriage? You mean the wedding or the marriage? Not marriage, but the wedding. Okay. Right, they say the difference between, right, being in love, right, and having a love. Being in love is sitting on the couch, watching your favorite movie, eating your favorite Chinese food with the person you love, right? Having a love is deciding where to put the couch, what to watch on TV, and who's going to order the Chinese food, right? Right? That's the difference, right? So right, when, like, for certain people, movements of social justice bring this experience about, right? For example, when we passed the Voting Rights Act. Passed the Voting Rights Act in the 60s. For the organizers who have been pushing for civil rights, they felt that that was a moment that corresponded to their imagined world. For members of the African American community, having the first African American president corresponded to their imagined sense of a redeemed world. Of course, we know those moments are only fleeting, right? You can't have those moments all the time. For some people, it's having a child. They've always wanted a child, having a child, right?
That's the closest thing I can.
For some people, it's watching their children get married because they feel like, as parents, like they did their job. They made it. They're going to be okay, right? For some people, it's escaping tyranny and being able to go on that first vacation after you've been a refugee, right? It's that first immigrant experience where you had enough money maybe to go away for a couple days for the first time, right? And realizing you can leave the shop behind for 2 days and it's still going to be there because you have trust in employee, right? And get paid. Right? Those are all moments, right? Those are all the moments, right? So let's see what you want to see what Rabbi Eliezer does with this story. So flip over to the second page, okay? Jacob had a hard time with his family. Right? What did Jacob do? What did he do with his brother, by the way? He screwed him out of the birthright and the covenant, right? Both of those, right? Both the Yerusha, the actual money, and the birthright covenant, the blessing, right? He did both, right? He's kind of a conniving little jerk, right? Like he's able to do that, right? So he's on the run. Then what does he do? He goes and works for Laban, right? And what does he do there? First of all, he gets screwed over by him. But then in the end, what happens after the first 7 years? He marries Leah. Okay, fine. Right? And then the second 7 years, what does he do with that second 7 years? He doesn't just sit back. He amasses wealth, not in the most straightforward way, though. Laban gives him the flock. He says, can you husband my flock too? That's your job as my son-in-law. He says, fine. And what does he end up doing? He ends up making his, Jacob's sheep, the most prized sheep, while Laban's sheep become like the cheap sheep. Right? And then it's like, we got to get out of here. Right? And overnight, they run away. And not only do they run away with Laban's like personal house idol gods. Right? It's like stealing the family crown jewels on the way out the door. Okay? Jacob, not exactly the most straightforward shooter, right? Not exactly the paragon of justice in the world, yet he is still somehow held up as one of our forefathers, right? So he's on the run, okay? So here it says, and Jacob fell upon his face to the ground, and before the foundation stone he prayed before the Holy One, blessed be he, saying, Sovereign of all worlds, if thou bring me back to this place in peace, I will sacrifice before thee offerings of thanksgiving and burnt offerings, as it says, and Jacob vowed a vow, saying, there he left the well, and thence he lifted up his feet. And in the twinkle of the eye he came to Haran, as it says, and Jacob went on his journey and came to the land of the children of the east. And the text says, and Jacob went from Beersheba and went to Haran. And the holy God is sanctified in righteousness. And the angels then answered him by saying, Baruch atah Adonai ha'el ha'kadosh. What did Jacob do in that moment? Remember this story? It's nighttime. He lies down, sleeps on a rock for a pillow. And what does he see? The ladder. Right. And what's going up and down the ladder? And who's at the top of the ladder? God. And what is it that he says to God? If you've got my back, when I come back here, I'm going to establish a dynasty right here. And he renames the place House of God, which in Hebrew is called Bethel. Right? Right? Bethel. And here he prays out of his heart. And again, what is it that the angels then say? The angels answer his prayer with Ha'el HaKadosh. Okay? So what did Rabbi Eliezer do with this prayer, this other prayer? What did he do with it? He took it from being this very sort of pageant, stultified prayer, and he turned it into a story. The story of a man who is in trouble and promises that if God helps him up, he gets out of this problem, he'll dedicate his life to a righteous cause. Two quick stories, right? One of the founders of AIPAC has a very similar story. The guy's named Larry. He was in World War II. He was in Germany. And he was asked to go over the breach and to take a position. And he gets severely injured. And he thought he was going to die. He ends up in the hospital, and he prays to God. And he says, if I ever get better, if I get through all of this, I'm going to dedicate my life to the Jewish people. And he became a Zionist after the Holocaust. He was a Zionist, and he helped found an organization called AIPAC. Been fighting for the Jewish people ever since. Right? Here's another story. It's a man in our congregation, young man, married a wonderful young woman, very well-to-do. They couldn't have kids. They couldn't have kids. And they tried IVF and it didn't work. They tried IVF and it didn't work over and over again. And on the third time, he stayed up late at night and he prayed to God. And he said, if we get to have a child, I'll dedicate my wealth to helping other Jewish families have children. And we know that 1/3 of all Ashkenazi women are technically infertile or have fertility problems. So not only did he get one child, he got two. He got twins. And they established a major fund through the Jewish Free Loan Society, millions of dollars to help pay for IVF treatments for young Jewish couples, members of our congregation. Right? Lest you think that Jacob's story is just a regular story, right? It's a story of human dedication to something that is powerful, right? When you go meet God, you can just say, oh, God, you're so amazing. And God's like, I know, right? Like, that's not the point. The point is, when I leave this place, if I feel like my life has been redeemed, I'm going to dedicate my life to the redemption of others. And when Jacob prayed and saw the ladder, woke up the next morning, dedicated his life back to the covenant again, and at that point had these kids and developed them into the tribes that became the nation of Israel. Right? We're named after him. We're not the people of Abraham, right? We're not the children of Abraham. We're the children of Israel, of Jacob, right? So the story of Eliezer of this one, of course, is when you go meet God, it's about what do you do after the fact? When you live on your purpose, when you live on your mission, right? The story of the Amidah is what do you do when you come back from heaven, not just when you go to heaven. Okay? All right, let's look at the second prayer because we're almost out of time. Back on 142. Everyone with me? Okay. So Abraham establishes the first prayer. Yaakov establishes the third prayer. Who's left?
Isaac.
Isaac, okay. Ata gibor le'olam Adonai mechaye metim ata rav lehoshia mechakel chayim bechesed mechaye metim berachamim rabim somech noflim v'rofech cholim umatir asurim umekayem emunato l'shnei afar mi chamocha ba'al gevorot umi domelach melech memetim chaye matzmiach Yeshua v'ne'aman talchiyot metim berachata Adonai mechaye metim. This is the Giverot section. It's about the prayer, the power of God, right? So what are some of the powers that we talk about with God in this prayer? Somech noflim. What does it mean? Somech noflim means to literally lift up the people who are bent over, right? Rofeh cholim. Heal people who are sick, right? Matir asurim. Free people who are bound, right? Umikayim emunuata l'shenei afar. Literally scrape people off the dust of the earth. Turn them to life again. And of course, then the beginning and the end, God's greatest act of love is Mechaye HaMetim, which means what? Resuscitate the dead. All right. We're talking about resurrection here, folks. We actually talk about resurrection 3 times a day, right? Right? Okay. Little hard in our modern world to swallow that one, right? Rabbi Gamliel, of course, says you have to say all of this. Rabbi Yeshua says, just say Mechayim. You have to believe in resurrection. When we talk about resurrection of the dead, in classic rabbinic literature, what are we talking about? Like in the what's called the eschaton, right? In the very far future apocalyptic times, right? Right? The holy rollers, right? Everyone will roll back up, go to Jerusalem. The Messiah will come, right? Right. Does that like feel right to you? Like that's the thing I'm going to pray for most in my second prayer of the Amidah. Like, what does it have to do with, by the way, with all these other things that God is supposedly powerful? Does God heal the sick? Yes and no, right? Depends on how you approach your perspective. How about lifting up? Are there people who are bent over that God lifts up? In a metaphorical way. Okay. How about people who are slaves and become free?
It's all through us. I mean, that's the
Right.
only way.
But Rabbi Schulweis teaches us, right, that when you say Baruch Atah Adonai, you have to add in your mind, through us, your witnesses, right? B'tochenu ha'edim, right? We are the people that are supposed to effectuate this. Well, how do we then... I love that, and I think that's right. And actually, Rabbi Eliezer loves that. But what about this other thing? Right? How do we... Yeah, Farzana.
So I imagine someone who's sunk in the depth of depression
Okay.
and feels like a dead person.
Yeah.
And that's Mechaya HaMetim. It's
Yeah.
not literal death, but it is spiritual death.
Wonderful. So there are, I call this death in life. Someone who's depressed, someone who's mired, someone who's stuck in their rut and can't see beyond themselves. Right? There's a story about Rabbi Akiva who goes and he's walking by the moonlight in a forest, and a ghost runs right by him. 2 or 3 times, whoosh, whoosh, right? And this is, of course, a story in the Talmud. So Rabbi Akiva is like a sorcerer, so he's going to stop the ghost, and he talks to the ghost. And Rabbi Akiva says, "Who are you, and what are you doing in the forest?" And he sees this man who is completely black, covered in black soot. And he says, I'm a dead man. And I spent all my career, all my adult life, making business, going to work, going home, missing out on, had kids but never really enjoyed them, participate with them, running my entire life. My kids never went to Hebrew school. We never brought them for shul. We never did Shabbos. And I died suddenly on a business trip. And now I find myself here. And every night I awake and I have to run to and fro, building my funeral pyre. And the break of dawn, I light it on fire and lie on top, only to wake up the next night again. This is a story from the Talmud. Rabbi Akiva, what he decides to do is he goes finds the man's family, and he gives the kids, he enters them into Jewish education. And he gives the kids, he teaches them Aleph Bet, he teaches them Torah, he teaches them Midrash, and when they're ready, he gives the kids a bar mitzvah. Teaches them about Shabbos and Jewish values. And only then, at that moment, do they say Kaddish for their father. And only then is the father freed from this purgatory. Again, it's a metaphor, right? What's the point of the story besides give your kids a bar mitzvah? What's the point of the story? Who is this guy? How about someone else? I love everyone who's talking, but anyone else? What's the point of the story? How many of us are that man that go through life wanting from one thing to the next and one thing to the next, and we miss out on the actual moments that our life is so important? We miss out on the birthday parties. We miss out on taking our kids to a ball game. We miss out on just going for a walk with them. And then we realize that if that's our entire life, then that's the end of our entire life. Like that purgatory is going to look just like that because that's all we know. Running to and fro, doing nothing but building our own funeral pyre upon which we'll be dead at one point, and that's the end of life. Right? So that's death in life. That's a dead life. Right? That's the life that I don't think any of us really want to live, but many of us find ourselves living or have lived at one point. But the great news is that anytime you could just turn the page and bring life back to death again, you can do that. How do you do that? The prayer is very clear. Find someone who's bent over and help them out. Find someone who's sick and bring them to the doctor. Help them out. Find someone who feels bound up and broken and enslaved to something and help free them. That is how you bring life back to death. Right? That is how you turn darkness into light and turn a dead life into a living life. You break others out of their own traps. Now, if Abraham created the first blessing and Jacob created the third blessing, let's talk about Isaac. Isaac is the most mysterious out of all of the patriarchs. We have very little knowledge about what he did. In fact, the only action he ever took in the Bible itself was to redig the same wells that his father did. He did nothing on his own. His entire story is a parallel to Abraham's story. He is the lost patriarch. He's also the most traumatized. Right? What's the story? What's the last trial of Abraham? The Akedah. We will return to the Akedah again. Okay, let's take a look at what Eliezer does with this story. Now we're on the bottom here, number 9 on the bottom. You with me? Everyone with me? Yep. Okay. So the rabbis imagine this not just as a father with a young child. According to rabbinic literature, Isaac was a grown man. Does that change our view of the story? If Isaac was a grown man who could make his own decisions, does that change our view of the complicity Isaac had in the Akedah or not? Of course it does, right? So look what Isaac says to his father. Remember, they go on this journey, 3 days into it. Isaac stops his father and says, Dad, I see the wood. I see the firestone. Where is the lamb for sacrificing? And Abraham says to his son, God will see to it, my son. Right? If there's ever a need for a comma, it would be right there. Right? Adonai ro'eh et le'olah b'ni. Right? The question is Abraham lying to his son, hoping for his son, or telling his son the actual truth? God will see to the sacrifice, comma, my son. God will see to the sacrifice, who is my son, right? And God will see to it, hopefully, my son. I don't know, right? They go up to the top of the mountain, and Rabbi Eliezer says this. Isaac said to his father, Abraham, O my father, bind for me my 2 hands and my 2 feet, so that I do not curse thee. For instance, a word may issue from my mouth because of the violence of death, and I shall found to have slighted the precept, honor your father. He bound his 2 hands and his 2 feet, and bound him upon thy altar, and he strengthened his 2 arms and his 2 knees upon him, and put the fire and wood in order, and he stretched forth his hand and took the knife. Like a high priest, he brought near his meal offering, his drink offering, and the Holy One, blessed be he, was sitting and beholding the Father, binding with all his heart his son, and bound with all his heart. Isaac says to his dad, what? I know. I know what this story is. I know how this story is supposed to end. Can you just do me one favor? Bind me tight enough so that I don't squirm, so that I don't disobey the command to honor your father. Isaac's complicit, which makes Isaac what? He's a martyr. He's not just a victim. He's a martyr for God. It changes the trajectory of the entire Akedah if you believe that Isaac knows the truth from the very beginning and then decides to go along with the sacrifice. Our friends across the street love this version of the story because it is a precursor to the story of Jesus. We are not going to go there. And I just went there. But we're not really going to go there, okay? Okay? So now, Isaac is staring up at heaven. Abraham is staring over him down like this. He has the knife aloft, the heavens open, and the entire retinue of the angels are staring down at him. And the ministering angels cried aloud and wept and said, Behold, the Erelim cry without the angels of peace weep bitterly. And the ministering angels said before the Holy One, Blessed be he, sovereign of all the worlds. Thou art called merciful and compassionate, whose mercy is upon all his works. Have mercy on Isaac, for he is a human being, the son of a human being, and is bound before thee like an animal. O Lord, thou preservest man and beast, as it says, the righteousness is like a mighty mountains, and judgments are like the great deep. O Lord, the preservest man and beast. What are the angels doing? They're pleading for Isaac. The covenant's about to be broken. The whole thing that you promised your servant Abraham is about to be broken, and they're weeping. They're weeping. So when you think of the Akedah and you look at this, you imagine Isaac looking up, Abraham looking down, and the ministering angels. Isaac can look all the way to heaven, because now the heavens are open above him, and they're weeping. Thousands of angels are weeping. It is raining upon Mount Moriah with the tears of angels. Okay? According to one midrash, the tears get into Isaac's eyes because he's looking up, and that's what causes him to go blind. Okay? The covenant's about to be broken. It is the angels who are trying to intercede. Abraham's not doing a thing, right? Number 10. Rabbi Yehuda said, when the blade touched his neck, the soul of Isaac fled and departed. But when he heard his voice from between the two cherubim, meaning God's voice, saying, Abraham, Abraham, lay not thine hand upon the lad, his soul returned to his body, and Abraham set him free. And Isaac stood up on his feet, and Isaac knew that this is the manner the dead in the future will be quickened. And it's Isaac who opened his mouth and said, Baruch atah Adonai, mechayeh hametim. According to this text, what happened to Isaac? Mechayeh hametim. The word quickened is an Old English word for resurrection. Okay, yeah. So, according to this, what happened to Isaac on the altar? He dies and comes back to life again. He dies and comes back to life again. Again, you can imagine how our friends across the street take this text, right? So we do if we don't wait 3 days. It happens like instantaneously, right? Right? Unlike the other blessings, who is it that says Mechayeh hametim? Isaac. And the other one, it's the angels, right? So whether or not you believe in resurrection, to me, I actually think that this is really interesting. This is like a really interesting moment. Abraham and Isaac are at the absolute nadir of their relationship. Right? He's going to murder his son. Now, if you notice, it says the moment the blade touched his neck. He didn't actually, right? Just touched the neck, right? And in that instant, Isaac went up and came back. And then he unbound his son. He stood up on his feet. And the question is, right, in the Torah, it's not clear. Did they ever reconcile their relationship? It's not clear. Definitely an argument that they never did. What is clear, no matter what, if you take this story seriously, is Isaac is a survivor of trauma. Right? And what did he do at that moment where he survived trauma? He wrote a prayer. Brings life back to death. So we don't have to be Isaac. We never have to go that far. Never should go that far. They never should. But so think about this now. Where in your life have you come to the edge? And you've come back from the edge. Bless you. It's the opposite experience of the Kedusha. In the Kedusha, you go to your maximal joy. And now in this prayer, you go to your maximal suffering. And in both cases, you come back from those edges. And here, Isaac writes this prayer. Gives life to the dead. Imagine if you survive a disease or a harrowing experience or a job loss. How do you address the universe in that moment? The worst thing, not the worst thing, but I would hope you wouldn't just be like, okay, yawn, right? The Amidah for Rabbi Eliezer is a prayer that is all about the personal spirituality of a human being, and they respond with the words of prayer. I went through a beautiful life. It was very hard. I suffered a lot, but I also prospered a lot, and because I got through it, I still feel like something's got my back. Praised are you, the shield of Abraham, right? I've suffered incredibly. I almost lost it all. I almost lost my kids, or I did lose my kids. I almost lost my business, or I did lose my business. I felt like I was on the edge of death, but I'm still here today. Praised are you, God, who revives each and every one of us from those moments and brings us back to life again. I've had amazing moments of sunrises and sunsets, of meadows and beauty and love and having children. And we got through all of that, and now I'm in this place where I want to dedicate my life to making the world better. Praised are you, God, who introduces the idea of holiness as a category in the world. These first three blessings of the Amidah have all sorts of different origins, but for Rabbi Eliezer, they have to touch the human heart. If the prayer is not a prayer from the heart, if it's only set down or carved out in stone, it doesn't count. And rather than throwing the whole thing out, he wants you to find the stories in your life that meet those moments. Moments of fortitude and resilience, of history, moments of deep suffering, and moments of great joy. It's 10:25 now. We have to actually end. So I want to wish all of you a Shabbat Shalom with that. Please enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
It seems like there's a major difference between prayer and davening.
Thank you for your weekly things. They're
Thank you.
delightful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, Shabbat Shalom.